A warm welcome to everybody on behalf of the whole team. As we say in Slovenia, we are so happy that we gathered in such large numbers to celebrate this wrap-up, which is a pre-wrap-up, because the wrap-up activities are the arts activities that are still going on in the frame of the Mladi Levi Festival and the Norderzon Festival in Groningen. So we have all gathered here to celebrate the end and the new beginning of the project that used to be Create to Connect, is now Create to Impact, and will be Create to Permeate. So this joyous opportunity will be used as a sort of thank you opportunity to everybody, and also as a sort of celebration of all the things that was done. And one of the things that was done is the publication of the book that was co-published by ZRC SAZU and Bunker. And I also take this opportunity to thank the whole ZRC SAZU team, especially Martin Pogačar and Iva Kozmos, who were the co-editors of the book. So the protocol of today is very easy and very quick going and very snappy, because we have a lot to say in a very short period of time. So I will only say that Create to Connect, Create to Impact is one of the EU co-funded projects that Bunker is part of. Bunker was the lead partner of Create to Connect and Create to Impact, but we're passing the torch for the next 4 years to our colleagues in Kulturgest, and we hope to continue, and we know we will continue even if we don't get the EU co-funding. So the sustainability moment is very much alive. And we will also continue outside of these networks that have a life of their own. This, I think, is the beauty of these very constructed realities that we live in, that we have the luxury of human relations and of friendship and collaboration to spill over that. And I think all of us today can testify to that, even though we are part of a formal partnership that takes place in a very structured, activity plan and partnership agreements, these relationships actually do take over, and at one point collaborations begin really beyond that. At this point, I really want to thank also the Slovene Creative Europe Desk, which is led by Motovila organization. They are our long-time partner, and not just Bunker's partner, but a partner of the whole scene. And they really work also beyond kind of being the support in application and report writing, but continue to be shaping the cultural landscape here, and also are advocates for everything that we do. So this membership here is not the only EU partnership that we are part of. Right at the festival, we just had a meeting of another network that is called Stronger Peripheries and Southern Coalition, and the name is very explicative, so I will not go into it. We are also part of still ongoing project Art, Climate and Transition, and we are also in the ramping up stage of Transmaking project and the Reshape project. Since Maya will be presenting and thanking all the partners and celebrating them, it is up to me only to present the panelists that in the following 20 to 30 minutes will present the Create to Impact, and then we will leave the table for the presentation of the book to its co-editors, authors, and to the audience. So I pass the torch now to Maya Vejin, who together with me was the leader of the network, and I think for us it has been a growing experience. She is in a triple, quadruple, quintuple role now, because she's also the head producer of the Mladi Levi Festival and the leader of many other EU networks that we do in Bunker. She can say on her own, for me it was a beautiful friendship and camaraderie work. And I think we, as they say, learned a lot, suffered a bit, and had some fun together with this. So further along are Tamara Bracic-Widmar, Head of Communications in Bunker, and Klara Drnošek-Sulina, the co-curator of the Mladi Levi Festival. They were both the head communicators of the project, and if there is one important task, it is to bring the project to the people, bring the arts to the people. And artists and producers can, of course, not do it on our own. And this is, I think, in a project that is called Create to Connect or Create to Impact, one of the most important roles we can have. So thank you also. Then we have Tjasa Pureber, our colleague from the scene, our esteemed colleague from the scene, from Theatre Gley. She's also a researcher and an activist, and she was also invited into this project, kind of towards the end, to help us look at it a bit from outside, standing of both two shores, and she will present, I don't know, her view of the past, what we did, if we did it well, and what we did together. And then not the last, but the first to kind of come into the future is Carolina Marques from Kulturgest. She is working for Kulturgest, which is an organization that is also a partner organization, and she was the head writer of the new application for the next 4 years. So if there is somebody that has a vision of what we will do in the future together, it's her. We are keeping fingers crossed for the application to go through, but even if it doesn't, we have a strong project that can be done in any number of ways. Yes. Thank you all for coming, and let's go.
As Alma already mentioned, one of the most important part of Create to Connect, Create to Impact project is partnership and the ties that we create among each other. We have started as 10 partner organization for a 5-year project, Create to Connect, and then strengthened the partnership with 5 new organizations for 4 years for Create to Impact. I would say that in these 9-10 years, the partnership is still very strong. We might be really different organizations with some financially very strong, some weaker, with different artistic approaches, visions, but I think we managed to create partnership that goes beyond. The partnership, of course, faced some problems, hit some rocks. Some directorship changes, and of course COVID, due to COVID, of course, there were lack of meetings, and that also didn't help. But the prospect of future collaboration with most of them proved that we are a really solid group. Some partners are here with us, others are not present, also some because they still have ongoing projects at this very time. I would like to thank them all for collaboration, and I really look forward to our future together. They are Arts and Theatre Institute from Prague, Czech Republic, Alt Art from Cluj, Romania, Beat Theater Garage in Bergen, Norway, thank you, Noorderzon from Groningen, Netherlands, Sant'Arcangelo Festival from Sant'Arcangelo, Italy, Public Art Platform from Tbilisi, Georgia, United Artists Label from Belgrade, Serbia, Drugo More from Rijeka, Croatia, Theatre Rotterdam from the Netherlands. Then there are 4 partners these partners are continuing the projects, hopefully with EU support. And then there are 4 partners that are not continuing with us. These are Arts Admin from UK, London. They are not continuing after 10 years of EU project because of Brexit, obviously, and then La Villette from Paris, France, and Tegint from Belgium, and Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Science and Arts. Last but not least, of course, Kulturgest from Lisbon, that we are passing the torch.
As Maya mentioned, partners are a very important part of the network, the heart of it, but also I think actually the most important part for making the impact in the society, which we were striving to do, are the numerous great artists that we collaborated with within the project. locally and internationally, and through which we reached out to various communities throughout the project. We have collaborated with our local communities and international professional communities, but also with the elderly, the young, primary schools and high school kids, the Roma community, communities of refugees and migrants, and the communities of people with special needs. We had done all that through different formats that the project had. One was Create to Connect, which is a line of productions or co-productions trying to apply new models of collectivity to production processes. One of such examples, for example, is Bodies of Knowledge by Sarah Van Hee, which was produced by Big Theater Garazian just now from April to June, and which was a place where people can learn from each other and share their knowledge throughout 6 or 8 weeks of the project. The other format is Adapt to Connect, which aimed at adapting the shared work between partners to the local context. One of such was, for example, 100% Lisbon by Rimini Protocol, and it involved 100 local participants being engaged into the project, and it was adapted, for example, also to Paris, which became 100% Paris, with, again, 100 local participants, and these two were not the only cities. One format is Space to Connect. This format strived to change the use of space within and outside of theaters with inhabitants. For example, one of such projects was a collaboration by Altart with the inhabitants of Roma Ghetto in Cluj. It was called Patarat Placemaking, and I do think that Istvan later will talk more about it. Another one is what we did here. It was in the theater, but we have installed thank you, an induction loop for hearing impaired people, so to enlarge the options for the hearing impaired. Another format that we worked on was the Working Encounters, which was bringing together artists, cultural workers, researchers and students to exchange knowledge and ideas. And we hosted 2 of them. One happened online, sadly, because of COVID, but the other one was in person in Innsbruck, organized by the United Artists Labour and Kunstraum Innsbruck. And we had Research to Connect. All the process of the network of the project was accompanied and observed by the researchers of the ZRC SAZU, one of the partners, but you will see what came out of it later on at the presentation of the book. A speciality of this project was also participating artists throughout the project. 2 of them are here sitting with us, Jaka Železnikar and Siniša Labrović, which made small or bigger interventions, artistic interventions throughout the project. And also, since the media landscape across Europe is changing and a lot of journalists are becoming freelancers and newspapers are struggling for survival, we decided in this project to make some space to invite international artists to come to see our activities, to write about them in other contexts. So in this way we have invited 15 journalists to write reflections on our activities, and some of them are here with us this time as well. Yeah.
Okay, so to continue with reflections, I think we can count here also our final wrap-up in infographics. We've decided for the book to do a short overview of the parameters in which the project operated. It revealed some peculiar and funny things, but also some serious things. Amongst the funny one and my favorite are the highest and lowest invoice of the project reported, one being €1.50 and the other being 53,200 euros for one for one invoice.
That's yours.
But in the other sense, the data also revealed how broad the project reached. As the busiest air route, for example, as far as we know, as it was reported, was a route between Mozambique and Portugal, and 15 people traveled there, and they were all part of the team for performance Fires. Another sense of how we try to see the parameters, the economic, geographical, and structural, was also the look into the percentage of women working on the project. We can say that we are doing good, but the glass ceiling is still in place, even for us. The women, not in Bunker, but in the project. Because as we see, there's a lot of women working on the project, but not on the highest positions, or not as many on the highest positions in art or as directors. So that would be that from me, and I think that infographics present a nice, peculiar, but also informative view of the project.
I actually encountered this project many years ago when I was following the program here in Stara Mestna Elektrarna and in Bunker in general. But it was later, like a little bit less than a year ago, that I was invited to sort of become a co-traveler of the project in its last stages, to kind of do the forensic sort of investigation into the impacts, basically, of the project, which basically meant that I turned into a little hamster and dived very deep into every source of and thousands of reports, of different media reports, of different websites, of the different projects that happened within this large project. I watched hundreds of videos of performances and so on and so forth, and I must say that I am still in my last stage of this investigation, so of course I have troubles actually. Like, the more I looked into it, the harder it became to actually kind of just find the very essence of this project. But what I can say is that I was impressed by just how much this project was both very much localized in its practice and transnational, and in its connections, and the way that it understood its mission, in the way that it actually connected many different people within the partnership, but especially outside of it. How many people it actually brought into a project, and how many different connections that were established through it. And I felt that in an era where, because the last 2 years actually of the project were obviously highly impacted by COVID and the restrictions of travel, I thought that it was very ingenious how this when it sort of like when it sort of looked like that this closure into the national, closure into the local, is going to become something, especially in some parts, in some countries of the project, is going to become a very politicized topic that will lead into more destruction, into more divisions, and so on. I think that this project, in a very beautiful way, actually managed to keep the local, but turn it into something that is not national, and I thought that was very clever from many different activities that sort of changed pace and transformed a little bit because of the restrictions that were there. One of the things that I also really enjoyed sort of researching, and I think of course a lot of that will be seen later on after the project hopefully transforms into its third stage, is actually the question of sustainability. Of course, sustainability in every European project is something that everyone absolutely must talk about it a lot. But what was interesting for me is that I didn't go through, I mean, of course, I went through the application and where it was sort of aimed that the project will be sustainable, but I actually looked into the project and its potential sustainability on, and not just whether or not they will last after the project itself ends, but whether or not they left some sort of mechanism or methodology that will keep going outside and beyond the project. And I was very surprised that even in the activities that were actually not aimed to be absolutely like sustainable or like last and so on, a lot of the times I found that different partners managed to sort of develop a kind of methodology in the way that they transformed their festivals, the way of working, the way of connecting, the way of producing, that actually has a huge potential to be integrated into every future activity of either the theater or the organization or so on. And I thought that was very clever how a lot of the research into this sustainability actually has a potential to last. The other thing that, when I went through hundreds and hundreds of activities, of course, one of the things that I kept coming back to was the interconnectability of this otherwise extremely big and diverse project. In a way, already mentioned, let's say, chapters of the project, space, create, adapt, research, and of course, encounter together, really truly came together. Because in the end, if you look from the phase of application, which is where I came in, of course I know that you've been doing a lot of the preparation before that, but from the application to the very final result reporting, you can see how, despite the vast number of activities, they actually stick together in let's say, announced and reasonable clusters that actually also created in the end a kind of homogeneity, but at the same time maintained its diversity. And I thought that actually, as an outside eye, as I was invited to me, that actually means that this kind of project actually not just makes sense, but actually has a great potential to keep going, because it is clearly showing that it impacted not just the partnership organizations, but actually a lot of diverse communities that it brought into the project. Because when you go through all the activities, you can see just how many different, let's say, oppressions were challenged through it, how many different communities that would otherwise never encounter art were actually invited into spaces, into organizations, how many people learned new things through these activities. And we will speak about the social impact later on, but it kind of feels that this project actually impacted the people it was working with. So at this point I will finish because I'm long, and just give the microphone to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that overview, and I think it's very much in line. It's important for us because sometimes being very within things, we lose that perspective, and it's actually very in line with the future. So we are in a natural direction, I would say, maybe. But so for me, just to say that I'm very honored to be here seated with you in this amazing table, and that it was indeed a teamwork to build this future application and to think about the future of this project, a project that has such a strong legacy and such a strong impact, not only on the communities that we are working with, but on us and our teams and what we are doing and questioning what we are doing. So in the end, in this future create to permeate, whether we get the funding or not, our intention is to go one step further. We have been developing work with artists and trying to understand what artistic practices and how they can be more participatory, how they can be more open to communities, how they can be relatable. And thinking about these methodologies, these work connections, we've worked with the communities trying to understand what are the needs, how we can connect to them. And we feel that now the onus or the responsibility needs to be in ourselves as organizations. How do we challenge our own modes of production to open up for the audiences? So this permeability, this idea, is of a bilateral relationship between us, our communities, our artists, but at what point do we need to, or we living in privileged modes of production as organizations, and we need to deconstruct that as well. How can we do that? By engaging people in decision-making processes also of our own organizations, in decision-making processes of curatorial nature, for example, decision-making processes of artistic processes in which people are not only performers, but also deciding and having a voice in terms of dramaturgy, for example. So we created this new project, Create to Permeate, in which we try to conceptualize and bring it to a practical dimension, how we can do that, how we can open up the decision processes to the communities, with the artists and in ourselves as organizations. And we've tried to divide that into 4 main lines of action. We called it communities as co-creators in the first one, in which we are producing new artistic productions with communities in this this co-deciding model of participation. And the idea is in each one of these lines of activities we have local activities and we have international commitments and things that we want to develop at a transnational level and that we want to continue. So the first one is this co-creation models, and then we have the co-curators. So this is really to invite communities to co-curate exhibitions, festivals. We have many different models. There's a very interesting example from Drugomori. They are here. I cannot prevent myself from talking about it because I think it's really interesting to invite a community to start curating a very small aspect on the festival the first year, and over the years they start to have more and more impact and more autonomy of the festival management and the curatorship of the festival, and after the 4 years they are responsible for the curatorship of the entire festival. So this is it's really an exercise of handing over power from the organizations, which is new for us. I mean, it's not new as a concept, but as an exercise, it's something experimental, so we are not sure how it's going to go, but the intention is clear. So this is the co-curators part. Then we have the co-deciders. In this part, we will open up to invite communities to engage at the management level of the organizations. What decisions can be made with the communities? Is it the possibility to open up? What can be opened up? What can be said about the way we run our cultural organizations? So it's really more about raising questions at this point and see what can be done together. And then finally to bring communities as the experts of the project, to hear, create space for listening, for learning with the communities, for engaging with them as, so not us as a position of experts, but really trying to shift a little bit this role, and also researching with the communities and the legacies that we are building on. So this is the main, it's very hard to summarize such a complex project because it really engages in so many different levels, and each one of the partners, we will be 12 partners plus arts admin, who is not officially partnered but will be in touch with the project as well. And it's really, I think it was an exercise of each one of us looking at our own realities and seeing how much further can we go. What haven't we done yet? How can we continue to develop that? So it's really creating change from within. And so I think it has all the potential to be done, that's why I think even if we don't get the funding, because the exercise and the methodology and the shift in terms of mindset and thinking is there. We started that work already. So now, of course, the more funding we get, the more we can do. But that line of thought, I think it's already started. And so it's really, for us at Kulturgest, it's also really an honor to be able to give continuity to this and to build upon such a rich legacy and to think about how things can flourish even further. And of course, more details we can share, but I try to be as short as possible in this time that we had here. And thank you so much again for having us.
Thank you to all for this presentation. Now I would actually like to show you a video that was made by Hanna Vodeb. She is a video artist that was also taking part or being here for a lot of activities of the network during the Mladi Levi Festival and other events at Bunker. Now she tried to do the same as Tjasha. She tried to go through the activities and gather an impression of what Create to Connect was.
The title of the project is Create to Connect, Create to Impact. This last word, impact, was actually in the focus of our attention and still is. We want to find out how do culture production institutions impact people in different social and cultural environments. Contacts are actually the most important phenomenon that holds together our society. Create to Connect, Create to Impact project started quite a long time ago. And therefore, in the project, some people and institutions have been together now for almost a decade actually, interacting with each other, making new relationships.
What struck me the most were the meetings I had with both young artists as established makers and with people from Ljubljana, and we talked a lot about sustainability. Sustainability is in the meeting, is in the encounter, is in the personal, and especially after a year of being in lockdown, being in our own houses, it's such a heart opening thing to meet other people, to talk to them, and to also see how we can spread that story through our lives, through our art, and how a festival such as Mladi Levi offers a platform.
So the main focus of the project is to get broader international overview of the ways the institutions and producers and artists can make impact on people.
Arrivals and departures takes the form of an arrivals and departures board, much like you'd see at a train station or an airport. But instead of announcing trains or planes, it announces names of people, those who are arriving and those who have departed.
Umjetničko-turistička produkcija Europa to Go je u stvari jedan sklop različitih europskih znamenitosti iz više gradova, od Pariza preko Venicije do Međugorja. Znači to su uglavnom destinacije gdje ljudi milionima, hiljadama hrle tamo da bi vidjeli, da bi se napravili fotku i vratili se. Sad smo mi to manje više doveli sve, donijeli sve ovdje u Rijeku.
With our approach, we tried to understand what is the impact of these project partners' activities on the society as a whole and also on the local environment. The research has shown that the European projects are really important to hold somehow the institutions together, to be able to exchange their experiences, to try out new approaches for making impact locally.
Spaces between us.
A digital environment on Zoom, for example, is definitely not the same as it is if people meet physically in one place, interact with each other, shake hands, greet, hug, and so on. It's very humane to do these kind of things. So for me, it was one of the most important findings, this understanding how important it is to be in touch.
What are you looking at? What can you see from where you are? I'm not sure how to do this. How will we do this?
Hey querido, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Perdona que no te respondí antes, ¿vale? Que no sabía muy bien qué enviarte, qué compartirte para que pudieras hacerte un poco una idea y puedas empezar a currar.
Waarom mogen Zwarte Pieten niet blijven? Waarom mogen wij dit niet doen? Waarom mogen wij dat niet doen? Maar educeer je zoals wij dat ook doen over jullie cultuur. Allee, wij worden hier in België, wij passen ons toch ook aan, of niet? Ik geef toch ook puree met worst.
uitvallen of de jongeren die niet in dit systeem passen, de kanarievogels in de mijnschacht zijn. Zij zijn degenen die ons aanduiden waar het mis zou lopen. Natuurlijk is het makkelijker om die jongeren uit dat systeem te duwen dan om het systeem in vraag te stellen.
Yes, we have 1,250 euros number 42. We have 1,200.
Da li je to istina da se istorija, povijest dva put ponavlja ili tri put? To ne znamo, ali eto postavljamo pitanje.
From anthropological point of view, you have to make new contacts in able to be able to make impact. This is one of the main findings too of our research team. Without contacts, there is no impact.
Meu nome é Carlos Guedes Pinto, sou natural de Lisboa e sou reformado.
This character who is carrying everything they need in life on them. So she has all this luggage, like it's all of these backpacks that she's carrying along. So she's somehow have this connection to the bag lady or the homeless person that is like having everything you have is what you have at this moment.
The Kopfkino amplifies live actions with a camera and projects this action enlarged onto the surrounding building facades, and can also be used as an outdoor cinema. The idea behind the installation is to activate the potential of the urban environment, the personalities that make up what we understand as our community and our city. Suddenly they become performers in their normal environments.
We also tested new approaches to be with people from a distance, and maybe it has improved ethnography a little bit.
Scolați clujeni de grabă și ne primiți frumos. Vă aducem sănătate, așa-i că oameni suntem, să fim mai buni cu alții.
It is a COVID-proof project because it is one person to one person that is connected digitally, but still in a real life circumstances. So there is a possibility to connect people in Zdar town to the people who are in the festival and ask them to dance together.
La nostra vita è in viaggio, quindi ogni volta la meta viene scelta un po' così, per degli incontri, per delle chiamate, per dei desideri di raggiungere dei posti. E poi negli ultimi 2 anni siamo andati in Costa d'Avorio, dove abbiamo sviluppato con la cooperazione italiana dei progetti sulla sensibilizzazione per le migrazioni irregolari.
Whole project team has somehow grown up, and therefore it is very important to keep in mind how those solid ties enable a great platform for extension to new project collaborations. It is very important to think not just about new ideas and new projects, but also about how to keep the existing networks together and people, not just to establish constantly something new, because now the Creative Connect, Creative Impact, this is a project with a tradition, and somehow it has to, or hopefully will extend also in the future to make change for the future.
Okay, so we go straight into the next phase of today's presentation, and that is actually a presentation of this wonderful book that I hope you've already managed to kind of like go through. I haven't completely, but I am already excited to do that. It's called Social Impact in Arts and Culture, The Diverse Lives of a Concept. It was edited by Iva Kosmos and Martin Pogačar, and this book is actually both, I would say, a monument to a legacy of this project, and at the same time an integral part of it. So in a way, I think that this book sort of reflects a lot of the activities that were happening within, but also pushes it further in terms of researching the impact that art and this project in a way and all the activities within it can have. And this will be somehow the discussion that we'll be having, and given the fact that we are all colleagues here, I am hoping that we will also have a back and forth exchange about a lot of the topics that we'll be raising that go in a way far beyond the project itself and really fundamentally questions what we do in art and culture. So before I go into details, I would just like to briefly present the speakers for today. First, on my left, we have Martin Pogačar, who is a researcher at SAZU, the Slovenian Academy of Science and Arts. He specializes in the research of memory, digital and media ecologies, and Yugoslavian popular culture, and also industrial heritage. He was, as I said, one of the co-editors of this book. Then we have Iva Kosmos, also a co-editor of the book. She is also a researcher and focuses her research on culture studies and correlation between culture and societies, but also the intersection of cultural production and also art. Then we have Josipa Lulic, who is a researcher, activist, who contributed an article in this book, is also a translator and co-founder of Center for Theatre of the Oppressed, POKAS in Zagreb. And then, last but not least, we have Istvan Sakac from Cluj, from Romania, who is a president of a partner organization, Altart, who has been a partner organization in this project, is otherwise artist, curator, cultural producer, and has been advocating for empowerment through culture for many, many years. So these are my guests, but first, before I go deeper into questions, we agreed that each of them will shortly present their sort of view of the topics of the book, how the book was made in that sense. So first, I give a word to the editors to briefly address how the book was made and what are the main topics within it. And I think that,
Thank you, Dasha, for the presentation. And before addressing the book, we need to thank Tanja Radoš for a magnificent design of this book, for making mostly research, and in big part academic book looks really lively and powerful and interesting. And we also thank Jana Wilcoxon for the careful reading and for definitely making this sound more fluent than our non-native English can do. So I will introduce the book with a story, how everything happens, how the book came to how we started the research, and how actually the book finally outgrown this project, because in the end we had to invite much more people to help us think the main concept that we were struggling with. So as many of you know, we were the people who were invited to this mainly cultural project to evaluate and to measure this famous notion, social impact. So in the beginning, if you want to measure something, you need to understand what is that. And for me personally, that was a big struggle, because this is an ambiguous, fluid, undefined term. And coming from my research background is in thinking art and society in different ways. And I always thought about many different and very sophisticated theories about art and society as being together on one spectrum. So on the one side of the spectrum, you have this idea that art is autonomous and it is independent, it can change society, it can act totally independently from it. On the other side of the spectrum, you have this idea that art, as every social system, is a reproduction of the society, and it reflects social norms and power inequalities and everything, blah blah. So I was thinking, okay, social impact. Where are you on the spectrum? And also, when we are talking about politically engaged art or social art or any kind of art that wants to change something, I was also thinking about, so what is your idea, social impact, about the relations between society and about society itself? What kind of society do we want to envision? Because if we look at, for example, classical notion of Marxist engaged theater, so there is an idea that there is a class oppression in the society and ideology hiding it. So then comes the political theater and says, let's break this ideology and let's show the class hierarchy in the society. So my question was, okay, what kind of society social impact envisions? And I realized that I am in a trouble when a colleague that was invited to contribute for this volume asked me to send him a reading list on social impact, and I understood that I don't have one. The social impact is not a notion that was born in art critique or in philosophy, and it doesn't have scholarly background or critical background. So I asked myself, oh, this became my quest. Okay, I will trace you. Social impact. Where were you born? How did we come to use you? Where do you come from? And I started the research, and I was reoriented actually to 20 years ago, to the British context. That was where I started. In British context, 20 years ago, the notion of social impact was developed, and it was mostly developed in policy papers. It was an idea that came from politics. So from this context, I went on to the context of European Union, and to the national context. And to keep the story very short, the social context in which the notion of the social impact develops is always the same. This is the context of cutting the welfare state. And while we are cutting the welfare state, there is the void. Of course, there were some activities that were done by the welfare state, and then some other social activities are invited in to help us fill this void. And this is voluntarism, charity, NGOs are on the scene, and also art. And what they're doing, they're stepping to fill this void in several different ways. On the first level, some of these services are doing directly what welfare state was once doing. You go to the retirement homes and you do services for retired people, or you go to the school and bring lunch to kids that cannot afford it. And then on the other level, these services are invited to help ease and mend the problems that are in a big part done also with the destruction of the welfare state. So, and here I think art has a bigger role. Come and help us build these communities that are now without an infrastructure, or the groups of youth that are unemployed, or the groups of migrants that are coming here. And look, as a society, we don't have other systems to integrate them. So art, please come and help us. And in this way, art is also kind of invited, and I want to underline that this is idea that comes from policy. So I will come to that we have many ideas of social impact, but this is idea proposed by the policy. So please, art, come and enable these people, give them knowledge and skill, and empower them to act actually in this kind of society that we created, which does not have a safe network of social services. So I finally came to my answer: what kind of society does the notion, as built in policy papers, notion of social impact, what kind of society does it envision? This one. There's no change. So this is the society that we want to have, and art and other services are invited to kind of help us to ease our problem, and also to redirect our focus from the fact that there is a structural problem, because we always individualize these problems. Okay, there's this group, and this group has a problem, and now we are going to help them. But the reason for the problem is not in individuals, but it's somewhere else. Okay, so now this is one part of the story, and this is part of the policy story. But of course, story become, or I can say this is a top-down approach to social impact. Thank you. But of course, we have a bottom-up. So the story complicates when this notion travels to actual users, to the art scene, to everybody that are using now this concept that became kind of a buzzword. And on one way, this concept is so omnipresent that today when people, including artists, practitioners, academics, researchers, when we talk about what we do, we just use the word. We say, what is our impact? Both in the art and in academia, because for us this was also a big part of our, for the inspiration for this book, because we realized that the notion of social impact in the art is totally complementary to the notion of social impact in the academic research. But then, of course, when people in the art start to plan the project that are supposed to be based on the notion of social impact, they do not usually, and normally, and thank God, they do not follow the logic and proposed by the policy funders, but they define and see this concept in their own different ways. They negotiate with it, they changed it, they intervene in it. And this realization that there is a big difference between how the notion of social impact is defined by policy and by funding bodies, and of course we are all influenced by it, but then we also negotiate and intervene in it. This is how the book was born. So we wanted to capture these diverse lives of this concept. How is this concept practiced and thought about? And now I will give the word to my colleague Martin, who will who will tell you more about how we conceptualize the book.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Tjasa. So we were, as academic partners in the project, we were tasked in the beginning with making a sort of like a wrap-up reportage publication that would somehow bring the project together. But as we are researchers and we are employed in a research institution, we're also bound by the measurability that has to be applied to whatever we do. So, and to put it very bluntly, we need points to get funding in the future. So, then we thought, okay, this was part of the story, but then again, we also, as we are researchers, we also want to, come up with something new, something different, and also to build on the existing knowledge and practices. So, and as Eva was explaining the more, let's say, theoretical, practical approach to our work, I'll go now from, let's say, the practical work, how we did go about putting the book together. So it all started deep in the pandemic when we drafted a call for papers, which was initially very much oriented on the pandemic as a crisis, but then we realized this only may have a certain appeal and reach, and decided that it would be a good idea to extend the perspective of the book and to involve as much as possible different voices and approaches to how to think about social impact in arts and culture. So roughly we knew where we're going, and we also knew that we have to be here on this day with the book printed, but these were basically the rough parameters of our work, and we knew that we want to make a readable and informative and also beautiful book. But apart from that, all roads were pretty much open, and we decided it would be a good idea to know where we're going, but then to still allow ourselves enough room, time was out of the question, to take the right to explore, to think about what we want to think about, and in a way this was also a process of denying the measurability demand, and also of denying the whole idea of social impact as policy. Clearly we want to have impact with this book. We want this book, to be read, to be circulated, and we're also very grateful to all the authors who decided to participate and who are really also very responsive in the process of putting this book together. And I would maybe to finish, just like to recount an episode that occurred through as we went along the book, and it kind of really nicely points out all the problems with harsh and strict deadlines, with dependence on funding bodies, as well as clearly the dictate to be creative and dictate to impact, because this cannot be, let's say, this always has to be a byproduct of some activity. If you set this as a goal, then you have already failed, I think. So, and in the process, we decided to invite Siniša Lavrović to contribute a piece, because we thought it would be a really good idea to have a non-scientific piece in the book. And the book was about 2 years in the making, and Siniša and I, we exchanged a couple of emails about what he could do, when he could do it, and because we are humans and because life takes its course sometimes independently of what we wanted, it turned out in the end that he will not be able to contribute to this. However, this was not the end of the story, because then it became clear that maybe this whole process can be really an illustration of how you cannot really demand from somebody to do something in 2 months for, let's say, a modest amount of money. And especially in the arts, deadlines are kind of outside of artistic universe. Clearly you have to do something by a date, right? But then again, you also have to have the security, the time to play, to try, and also to fail, right? And this is the policy aspect of social impact. I think it does not really allow for failure, right? Because we have to be here today, and the book is here, but that's, a lucky coincidence. No, really, just a lot of hard work behind it. So thank you for now.
Thank you, Martin. I will now give the word to Josipa. Josipa, in your artistic practice, the essence of it within the framework of theater of the oppressed is actually to have an impact, to influence the society somehow. And in the article you also go into depth how these two things are or are not connected. So maybe if you can speak a little bit about how you approached this topic within your, not just work, but also like in the article of the book, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. So yes, for those of you who do not know it, TO, Theater of the Oppressed, Teatru de Permeate, Gledališće zatiranih, Kazalište potlačenih, and so on, is practice of theater that was developed in Brazil by Augusto Boal in the 60s and the 70s, and then transferred to Europe because of the dictatorship and political situation in Brazil that made Boal exiled. And once he came to Europe, in actually the height of the welfare state, he continued to develop his theater. The one that he developed in Brazil was the theater of a strong and clear idea about what society should be, in the sense that social impact also has one. Maybe not openly social impact as a concept by the policies, also has this clear idea of what society should be, and really agree with you on that, Eva. Maybe not openly stated, but clearly demonstrated through ideology. And the society that Theo envisioned was something completely different. It was a society freed of different systems of oppressions. And when Boal came to Europe, what he noticed is this concept of oppression that was so clear and easy to understand for the people he worked with in Brazil. In Europe did not seem so clear-cut. So people would come and say, but I'm not oppressed, I'm completely fine. One of the things he started then to develop is this one technique within the scope of TO, which has many different techniques, called cups in the head, because there aren't so many cups in the street, especially at that time in France, beating people down, but there are many cups in the head that, these ideologies that are that permeate the way we are socialized, we are educated, we are in our families, that allow us, that make us not free. And these cups are the ones that Boal was interested in, and trying to understand how the oppressor now transferred all of its work to us, basically, so we can oppress ourselves. But what is interesting, that when practitioners in Europe and then in North America started to use TO, they focused so much on this individual, on this aspect of individual change, of that it actually started to reproduce this same society that it was on one hand trying to talk like it wanted to change. So it reproduced the status quo, because what it did is basically said, in a typical dramaturgy of TO, of forum theater, you have this idea of the oppressed who wants something, has a want. There's the antagonist, who is the oppressor, who is denying this possibility. The oppressed uses many strategies, and they fail. And then the audience is invited to come in and to try to find a way how to change the story, how to change the dramaturgy, in order for the oppressed to prevail, to win. And this is something that was taken quite literally and quite individualistically in TO practices throughout Europe and US especially. And it is quite interesting to see how this concept of social impact is quite easy one to use with this type of TO, the one that tries to find the ways for individual to change so they can be more empowered, they can find more ways to survive in the society, but it doesn't really questions the context. One of the most basic points that Boal was talking about is the social context or the structure inside which all this comes. So when talking about our practices is basically what after years and years doing this European TO, because this was the only one that we knew how to do, that was the one that we learned, that was the one that we thought was the only one, is that basically what we encountered is the practice of Barbara Santos, who was one of the Boal's closest collaborators in Brazil, who was the artistic director of the Center for Theatre of the Oppressed in Rio de Janeiro, and is now living for the last 12 years in Berlin and leading the organization called Coringa there, and also who is part of this international Magdalena network, which is the network of feminist theatre of the oppressed, where we also belong. And why feminist theatre of the oppressed? Not only because it deals with the topics of feminism, obviously, but also because it extends the question of feminism not only to the question of content, but the question of form, the question of structure, and the question of policy surrounding things. So it's called in Portuguese, so the original is Teatro do Oprimido, and the new is Teatro das Oprimidas. So it's unlike singular male of the original, it's now plural and female. And the basic thing is that what TO is trying to do within Teatro das Oprimidas, de las Oprimidas, feminist theatre of the oppressed, is to question the structure inside which the oppression occurs and tries to find a way to make a difference on that level, and it's using aesthetics as a way to do it. So to just to finish as a way to come back to the actually question of specific, this is one of the case studies in my article, but also the specific concept or context that I was using when I was writing was to see what is changing and on which level, and this is something that was left a bit still, and it is still a big and open question. So my take was that to think about change, I'm really know even less now when I took some time to actually try to understand the mechanics of change, of impact, of something which is on the level of society than I did before, because the levels of impact that I was concerned about, that I was the levels of individual, the levels of community, the levels of society. I was trying to find mechanisms of what I've seen, of what I've understood in my practice as the impact, as trying to change, so not just superficial in order to remain the status quo, but to make an actual change. And I'm afraid what they found was like really small things. And but those small things are tangible, and hopefully these tangible things can then grow into something bigger.
Thank you. We'll go back to this, but before we do, and before we open up the floor for everyone, so if you have a question, it's also time to formulate it for later on. Istvan, I would also like to ask you to have a short introduction. Yeah, okay. The way that your practice is involved is actually through a research in one of the articles, especially the radio project that you do in Cluj with, particularly with Roma and other, let's say, more disadvantaged communities locally. But what you will speak about now is also the limitations, let's say, of socially engaged art as you found them in Cluj through your work.
Hey everybody. Again, I'm so happy I'm here, and I loved so much the presentations before because it shows how much we are captive in power discourses, in the necessity to comply to reporting, to submit Excel sheets, and the thing is that I'm working in a ghetto. It's a 2,500 people ghetto. It's the bottom of existence, as much as I known it ever. And we just pulled a community festival. And so that I will shorten your torturing. I will show you the after movie of the festival, and then talk a little bit. I hope you will like it. Okay, so this was it. The thing is that this video is so nice and tidy and clean. It was done mostly for whiteys like us. It doesn't show the blood and the sweat and the dirt and the toxicity of the environment, yes. All these years that I've been working, I never knew if what I do is okay or not. Because I always suspect myself that I bring my precepts, my concepts, my contaminations as a white middle-class heterosexual cis whatnot male and impose them over them. And every time I'm in this kind of trouble, yes, Mother Mary comes to me. And in this case, it is a group of hardcore leftist anarchists called Os Cangaseiros. And I would like to read you two quotes from them. So all these, if you want, regimes of truth that we are captive in, they say like this. The function of this chattering is so that the poor are not able to dialogue because they only know how to express themselves in the language of their masters. This lie, which doesn't just date back to yesterday, has the purpose of once again civilizing the insubordination of the poor. The second is politics and law. Principles of the bourgeois counter-revolution represent a universal project, a promise that the poor would be able to participate when they adopted the existing structures. Now, this is the point. The bottom ghetto is really the bottom. And when we go there, we always try to see what is our position, what is the potential oppression that we are bringing them, because there is what we want to do and there is what we need to do. What we want to do is let them develop their language, their tools, empower them. Again, what a loaded word. Yes, it's all shit. Actually, I'm trying to talk truth through lies, and you can see how difficult this is also in your lives. And in the end, this is what I want to do, and what I need to do is transform all this thing that I do, honestly, in Excel sheets, PDFs, submit them in a language that is intelligible to the financiers, and hopefully they get the next round. It's really so horrible, so betraying, because you want to be truthful to yourself, to the Patriot people. And last but not least, maybe even last, the European Commission or whatnot. No, and so this is everyday questioning, self-questioning. It's really hard. I would rather, if I am in a good mood, then I think about Freire, about how you can work with these people, with the oppressed, so they create the frames in which they can liberate themselves, in which they can lead their process of emancipation. And that is hardcore, because sometimes this threatens your very existence as a legal entity, because then they steal your stuff and you need to ask for fake receipts or whatnot in order to be able to submit the proper Excel sheet with the something else. So it's really threatening your multiple existences, which is, if we want, an onion of conditionings that you live in. But there is still a bit of hope in this, and I would very much like to develop, if you are interested, in the idea of insurrection and the sustainability of insurrection. And this is the point. Freire also says that you need to step the fuck back if you want these people to emancipate. It's not you bringing in your concepts, it just let them do it. And what you need to give them is space and credit. Yes, now this is very hard because of the multiple conditionings. So insurgents, insurrection, these are the things that you see. There's again a cool quote, I hope I find it fast. I have it in brief. How does this come about? Wait. So it says, the violence that reigns among the poor, which is sometimes practiced openly among them, is the equal to the violence of the conditions that constrain them. And you will also understand, it's also your lives, you are also constrained by multiple structural violences, and you want to rebel, you want to insurrect, and you do it as much as you feel you are allowed to, not to threaten your existence. You're like putting Sinisha in a book of scientific research, or pushing a little bit the borders of the regime of truth that you are captive in. But this is it. There is always this tension, this violence, and which bursts out in little insurrections or bigger insurrections. How this can you propagate by if you want, contamination, by resonance? This is the question. Okay, that's it.
So before we continue, I would really like to invite, and I also see some people who contributed articles in the audience. So if anyone would like to share any of the opinion, has any question, this is the moment. I will give you the microphone, so please feel free. If not, at least at this point, of course I do have some extra questions. And Istvan, I will just continue with you briefly. You spoke a lot about the way that as artists, as cultural producers, we inevitably start colonizing the communities we are working with. And in the project of Radio Pata that you also that is also described in this book, you introduced the anarchist actually ideology or methodology, sorry, not ideology, of do-it-yourself as a sort of like an answer on how not to. A little bit of what you said about just now about giving space, giving credit to people you are actually working with. So what have been your experiences with sort of like pushing the DIY agenda within the framework of otherwise, as you've mentioned, very bureaucratized processes of reporting, of all of that? Have you actually managed to sort of like make sure that the not just the content but also the production of the activities within this framework can actually be self-organized, can actually be DIY, can actually be taken over by the people you are working with in your communities?
Okay. So it depends what you name as working. For example, the Facebook page of the festival in the last 28 days reached 72,000 people and had 36,000 people engaged in it with clicks, likes, comments, whatnot. This is huge. For a festival that comes from a totally invisibilized community. So if I want to define this, what works and this is what works, oh fuck, it worked. If I want to stance myself differently, is in terms of did it have an impact on the white middle class in Cluj? It somehow worked. We had a little bit less shit comments on Facebook, go and work, and why do you organize a festival and not some labor camps, and so on. Yeah, that's it. If you look at the community, if it worked for them, fuck knows. It's this is such a brutally oppressed community that you need to look in their eyes. Sorry. Okay, I always get this. And you never know. Okay, that's something.
Thank you. I know that this can actually, this actually is something that I think we often lack in our project, and that is the fact that when we invite different communities within our projects, it also leaves an impact on us, and we often don't have the way how to deal with it. So, Josipa, when you speak about theater of the oppressed in your article, you on several places actually say we should not be dealing with fundamental changes, like think about let's say fundamental social change, a revolution if you want, as a one big time event, but rather think about ways how to basically create some kind of transformational practices on smaller level, on sort of social change within the framework, within the community, the small amount of people we are working with directly. So can you expand a little bit about this idea about, as you call it, the idea of constant transformation as it actually relates to art's impact that we've been speaking about?
I can answer you in two ways. One is theoretical, that this is the concept I took from John Holloway, and the idea of cracks in capitalism, or of also Freiren concept of trying to... And the other is that when you're facing such a big enemy, such as the capitalist society with the older systems of oppressions that are part of it is, then you can't really, or maybe I've lost hope in thinking of big ways to have this grandiose revolution that would change how everything is. So maybe it is a sound theoretical political approach, and maybe is the admission of defeat, and I'm not sure which one it is. But it's the one that I can live with and get out of the bed each day. Because like I said, if I really try to dig deep and think of what is the impact that my work had, or what really did change with the work that we did, I think I found, and the ones that I've described in the article are the ones that I really found are actual changes and are tangible. And they really did happen, and they are small. So my hope basically is that those small changes, if they can grow enough, if they can happen enough time and in enough places, and if they can start to get connected, maybe those changes will actually crack the capitalist society in a way that that won't be sustainable anymore, that it will dissolve and change into something else.
So Eva, to sort of pick up where Josipa ended, but go to it from a different perspective, besides the fact that you co-edited this book, you also wrote a research paper basically about one of the Kulturgest programs that happened within the project that deals particularly with the question of how to deal with colonial legacy and Portugal's colonial history in general. And I thought that within this article, it was very interesting how you've mentioned that it is basically impossible to measure social impact of a particular piece within, like, let's say, a scientific methodology. To say otherwise, you can notice an immediate impact on the audience in terms of were they touched by were they moved even, were they thinking or let's say reflecting what happened on stage. But how does that translate into a lasting, let's say, social change, or their sort of activation as, let's say, activists of their own lives? That is much harder. So if you can maybe expand a little bit on this topic, I would be grateful.
Thank you, Tjasa. Well, I did. The part of me in the project was also to go to a place and measure something. And as I did in the introduction, I again did the same thing. I started to look at the measuring process, not at my object of my measuring. I wanted to understand how the measuring process works. So I did actually a report. I talked to people, I did interviews, and I can confirm there. Now, how do we understand? I asked in my article, is this an impact? I can confirm that people were touched by it. It was a great place, students liked it, they talked about it, and so on. But is this an impact? So I started to talk about it. I can talk about it, I think, in two ways. Like seriously, like let's engage with the notion of social impact, and then let's try to step out of it. So if I talk about it seriously, I looked into social impact studies, which were mostly not done academically, but by different private cultural organizations, and they are much more, there is much more of them in the British context than in European, because in the British context they are more, they more insist on having these very tangible proofs of some results, while here sometimes the funders will be already fine with something softer. So I looked at these studies, and from a research point of view, from ethnography, there is many mistakes. So the sample is very undefined, it's unclear who is included. Considering social impact, everything is about social change, right? Not social change, social inclusion. So you should reach to excluded people, but are these excluded people involved in these studies? This is unclear. So sample is wrong. Wrong, like it's very questionable. Yes, sample is shady. Then there is this. Sometimes there are interviews, most of the times there are questionnaires, but again, from the very strict ethnographic point of view, these questionnaires are often shaped tendentiously, like, do you like the show? Like you are or what I did, and I talk about very openly in my research, I actually asked those people, do you think this will change how you look on the Portuguese history in the future? They replied no, but I also asked tendentiously. So these are all mistakes that you can correct. There are two other problems which are unresolved, and these are conceptual problems. So this is again, I'm just looking seriously at what does this notion of social impact brings. It talks about the long-term effect in society. And then it also talks about cause-effect relation. Like you have something artistic, festival, I don't know, a range of activities, something, and then we are supposed to measure direct effect of this. And conceptually, this is not how it works. So, and this is unresolved, even in social impact studies. They just jump over this problem. And all of these social impact studies, not all, I cannot say about all, but most of them, they talk with people immediately after the artwork is performed, which I also did. And this is unrelated to the long-term effect. And even if they can prove, okay, after, I don't know, 3 festivals, this community started to have their own whatever activity of this and that, it is still impossible to claim that this is the exact clear relation of only the artistic activity. So conceptually speaking, the answer is no, we cannot measure it. And till now, apart from addressing these conceptual problems, nobody had an answer, but this is a game, like, this is the game we need to play, and we are also playing it on the other side, on our side as academic researchers. So, if I now step out of this question and stop talking about this seriously, if I think about it, should we continue to measure it? If we need to, why not? If we want to participate in the system, but that doesn't mean that we cannot measure anything. Just as we said, we cannot measure the notion of the social impact as it is currently conceptualized. This is impossible, but it doesn't mean that we cannot measure anything. And just to step out of this measuring thing, well, I was listening to Istvan and to Josipa, and kind of this dark note on the question of impact. I started to think, okay, we criticize the impact as defining the possibility of doing something very individually, right? We constantly talk, let's think, in a bigger picture, let's think about structure. But we should also think about ourselves as impactors, not individually, like what exactly my work in this specific location is doing, but we should also think about ourselves as a network of connected impactors, which can bring something, not what can only my individual work do. I think this could be a way out of depression that is unavoidable if we think in the term of individual impact.
Thank you. And last but not least, because I'm still kind of hoping for a question or a comment from you, but Martin, in your conclusion, which I recommend everyone to read, I really loved reading it. I thought it's really thought-provoking. You actually introduce a topic that I have rarely seen discussed when it comes to criticizing, let's say, conditions of art production, because we oftentimes in art world we speak about challenging power and power relations, challenging oppressive, let's say, working environments and so on, but we rarely speak about control. And you introduced the topic of control. And when I thought about it, how control manifests itself and how it influences the art production, of course, this control comes in many different forms. Control in forms of financing, in being very, in demanding a huge creative mind to sort of like go around a very narrow framework of reporting, of producing without excuse, of delivering the final product, if you want. And do you believe that challenging this notion of control that is imposed on art producers in many different forms is perhaps a way to produce art, and I won't say after everything we heard with greater social impact, but perhaps with, let's say, more subversive impact on society?
Thank you, Tasha, for this rather complex question. First, I think that both impact and control, they are, in a way, to give sort of like more historical political picture to it. They are offshoots of the Enlightenment, really. They are what really made modernity, in a way, now looking at it in retrospect, because what was really the consequence of the Enlightenment and of the age of reason, it was industrialization, modernization, also standardization of various kinds of products, quantification and scientification of life, in a way, because everything, you know, as we all know, has to be measured in a way, it has to be weighed, you know, assessed how it works in a quantified world, and impact as, you know, as policy and control as let's say as a manifestation of the world order that we live in today, are, let's say, direct consequence of the age of reason, in a way, and also of, as I said, standardization and also measurability. However, if we reduce, and this is really the question of reduction, let's say creative process to a prescription, so you have to be now creative in the next 24 hours, or if you then quantify feelings, right? How can you do that? You know, if you quantify life, then you really end up with denying life. So, and this is also, and I will just now have to read the quote because there's no way I can remember it. This spans clearly arts and culture, but also politics and the economy, but also the environment, this desire of the reasoned man to control. And James Baldwin once said, the Swiss landscape is ordered. Nothing could be more remote from passion. People who cannot make love make money. And it is designed to advertise one of the most flagrantly fraudulent Edens in our unhappy history. So, in this kind of, let's say, a bit pessimistic assessment, reveals the whole problem really with both impact and control, because if you want, you know, a Hochglanz landscape, then you will have to eradicate, you know, life, basically. So, and when it comes to art, I think in the context of speaking about art and social impact, it is I mean, it has to be quantified, but if it is quantified, then it has to be reduced in a way. or just, emptied of life. But that's not really what art historically has been about. So I think that, and then there is this whole question of the whole idea of uncontrollability of the world, which goes again back to the Enlightenment, when nature was to be conquered and ruled. But this kind of shows that it is impossible, really, as we see now with global changes in climate and pollution and everything. So it goes to show that we will have to rethink communities, and we'll have to politicize build, to refer to the organization of the chapters, if we want to find, I would say, a way out of this predicament, which is clearly, as Baldwin also noted, pessimistic. But speaking of the role of art in that, it is, I think, the way of, in a way, forced poetics of Glissant, who said that, you have to take the language of the oppressor, really, to reinvent your position through that language. So, and art, I think, has the capacity to do that in terms of not just evading control, but also and denying impact as policy, but also in a way as a way to open new doors, open new ways, and really make us think about what we are and where we are in this very moment. And I will have to quote again to close. So it is all about creating difference, to establish strangeness, really, then to let the fiery arc of human emotion leap and close the gap. And I think this, the issue of strangeness is what kind of pushes us out of what we are used to think and what we are told to think, and it is through strangeness that we can detect difference, but then also incorporate it and move on to create, obviously, new unknowns. Thanks.
Thank you. Istvan, you wanted to add a little bit?
Yeah, sorry for earlier. I tried to finish the thing. How does working with community in terms of co-creation, DIY work? So, in terms of content, what we try to do is hijack popular formats. For example, we hijacked the format of Got Talent and had them on the stage to show their Got Talent. We hijacked the idea of fashion show. You saw it in the movie, and they were nibbling on the dirt. And we had the red carpet put directly on the dirt. We hijacked the format of TED Talks, so we had official TED Talks in the festival, and so on. It was all their content, their supermodels, their TED Talkers, their Got Talenters, and so on. And even so, when we came up with the lineup of the musicians that we could afford, we went to the community, is it cool? They said, what's this shit? We don't want this. We want that guy and that guy and that guy. Okay, so we started to grab up some money for that. So it's a very messy process, and it also triggers lots of community dynamics, because they also love and hate each other. So if you please this guy, you will increase the hatred in that guy. So it's really messy. It's more like a thing of psychology than sociology, if you want, because there is still a distinction between. But no. And just to finish this, in terms of insurrection, again, that's my point. We have another group which exists for 10 years of brave middle-class citizens, and after 10 years we are the biggest politically involved citizen group, and only now we start to see the differences between what was 10 years ago and what is now. And it's a very safe environment, it's reproducible, it's documentable and everything. In 9 years of working in there's no hope in hell that you would be able to measure change. It's again, it's the width of the smile measured in millimeters. It's the dilation of the pupil. Can you do that? So that's it.
So, with that in mind, if there are no more questions, and if there are some, this is now the last chance. If not, then I would really like to thank our guests for bringing a whole new notion to the language that we are very much used to, and I think should and must be challenged further. And I really strongly recommend to get a book there and to read further into it, because I think that I had the chance to actually go through different articles, and I think they, in each their own way, are very inspirational. So I hope that this book will circulate amongst us for many years to come and provoke our thoughts further. So thanks everyone, thank you for coming and listening, and I think the next, that Tamara has what's next.